Hello, this is Michael. Welcome to week three. I'm really impressed. Everybody did a lot of great work in week two, and I knew I threw quite a bit at you. Um, First of all, I just wanted to give you a overview of what I was hoping you all learned last week. So, first of all, you all did a good job. Many of you had never really used some of the tools in Twitter, or maybe weren't even aware of what Twitter is. So, the reason why I wanted you to do this is for one, it's not on. Well, for one, Twitter is an incredible source of data. So there's almost everything possible in there if you could only find it and if it was only interesting. So this week we're trying to go up this the ladder to this pattern area, which I'm going to call a little bit better than just junk. So the reason why I say junk is that we don't know if our data is any good. We may have found it and you may have picked a source because you're like, well, this is interesting because someone else made it interesting. At this point, I want to kind of genericize this data, make it yours, forget where you got it, forget where it came from, and just use it to jumpstart the actual tasks that we're going to do of making data valuable. So that being said, Twitter's a great place to start. What I wanted you to realize is that the information itself, the tweet itself, while it seems like it's the most interesting part, actually the way you find and organize everything is through the other data. The extra data in there is kind of the lifeblood of Twitter in many respects. We'll find that they came up with something else later, but in many respects, this other data, the date, the time, the location, all the things that they keep about that data is important. So the same thing's true of your data. So if we go over to some of the examples, let me just take a look here. I'm just going to pick a few at random right now. So one thing I did have a question about, nobody really picked any of the examples from Airtable, so I was happy that you tried out import.io. I think it is interesting just to know that you can actually take data programmatically or physically like you did from other sites and do things with it. That's a pretty cool idea of how shareable, even unintentionally shareable, some of the information on the internet is. But it isn't necessary for this class because this week we might find that some of your data is just, it's not very good and it's not very usable. So if that happens, all the exercises this week are really there to suss that out and see if we need to change or something like that. So for that being said, let me just take a look at a database. So one thing I do want you to do is to clean up and get rid of columns and fields that were used by the source for some reasons. Those will be fields that'll say like URLs in them. So if there's a URL in them, you can delete that field because that's not your URL and it doesn't mean anything to you. To be more specific, let's take a look here. You'll also find, and I'm just choosing somebody at random, sorry, but let's just take a look at a database. So here's a good example of something that's pretty usable. Whoops. It's pretty usable. One thing, let's take a look. We've got a title, a description. You can see here this tags are something that you guys will probably want to create this week if you don't have them already. And look how nicely Airtable does to format these things. So these are like a controlled language so that you can basically tag something, and this gives you some ability to group things. And grouping is very important this week. Same thing here, apparently. Actually, this is a good example of if this region was, right now it says Sonoma, which I happen to know is in California, but this region could say Champagne, could say Bordeaux. Basically, you could say anything you want, and this data structure that you have could support an enormous variety of data. So that is a big part of this week. Let's look at the structures, maybe create more columns so that we can make this data support almost anything so that as we organize, it's actually starting to become worth it. That's why I didn't want there to be a finite amount of things to organize, only because, it's fairly easy if you only have 20, 30 things. If you have 30,000 things, you have to come up with some different ideas. So I would also say, whenever there's some kind of a rating, like this is points, whose are these? Where do these come from? I delete them because you don't know what they are and what they mean, and that's another thing. So any kind of metadata like that, like a rating, We'll have to add later on. You'll get there, pardon me, in week 8 or so. We'll start talking about how data about data is important. So this is actually data that is about this particular thing here. So date of review, again, this is a review, delete it. Vintage year is important, that's good. Name, I think that looks fine. Variety looks fine. Images are great, although you don't actually need an image. When we get later to referencing these images, they'll just be a blank box with an X in them. But it's important to know that there is an image, and I think I mentioned to some, what does this image represent? So this is actually more important that there's an image of the bottle, I guess. You could have an image of the label. You could have an image of it, people drinking it. Those could all be separate fields, and if it's important to your topic, you can invent those. And again, you don't necessarily have to tell me what the image is. You're just coming up with the structure to help organize it. And this winery looks good. So this looks it's in pretty good shape. Let me take a look at another one here, just as an example. We've got records. All right, let's see. So this came, this is actually another good one. This came top 200. So at this moment, we don't know that it's the top 200. We don't need to have any quality to this data because we're here to organize it. So right now, we're just saying the topic is records themselves. So when it comes to this ranking, this is somebody else's qualitative information they added to it. If you wanted to rank every record ever made, let's say, for example, well, this wouldn't actually be that helpful. So I would say ranking, in this sense, I delete it. Artist, album name, year. If there's a URL for art, delete it because that's somebody else's URL. Alt is just a way to describe the cover art, and that's good. So you could say there's cover art is just call it blank because there's a art piece here. Sorry, so don't delete this column. Cover art's fine. You just don't need the URL there. The alt is good only because it might be helpful to say what it's called. It's just the artwork for the album. So let's take a look here. Artist album. This is a description of the album, and so because it came from someplace, it's okay to keep it right now. Describing something is fine. Not sure. Delete this column. Related image. I'm not sure what these are. So you'd have to look through each one. But again, URLs, I'm just interested, what does the URL represent? Is it something you can organize? If it's an image, fine. If it's something like related content image, I don't know what that means. So I might just delete it, etc., etc., etc. So that's a couple of examples of where I want you to go this week to start manipulating, start deleting your data, start adding new columns, etc. And we'll go through, there's one other twist to this week. One thing we are learning a little bit, you can see here in helping understand and to share your work, it's best to sometimes start with a post-it because of Mural, and then add your comments, etc. in a comment because the comments are pretty robust and you can talk as much as you want. When I said to @mention me, you have to @mention me in a comment. You actually can't @mention me in a post. Here it doesn't work that way, and that's fine. We're all learning, but you can also see here where it starts to get a little bit noisy as we're looking through and talking about things. This takes up less space to do things in the comment section, and as you add things, like here, adding these really wasn't that helpful. So I understand everybody's just getting used to this. They're not quite sure how to use Mural, but I think there's a meta level, as always, to content organization, which is something we're practicing in Mural as well as learning about. So no worries. It's just that as we move on, I want you guys to become more sophisticated in how you use Mural to share with the group. Although I will say this week, everybody did a terrific job of helping each other and giving terrific feedback. Couldn't be more happy about that. So if we look in week 3, there's a twist. Week 3 has a different let's call it a different pattern that Mural invented, where you can only put in post-it notes, and it will actually organize them for you in order. So just to let you know, it's a little twist this week. It doesn't work the same way. So there's some questions that I've asked, and I want you to start thinking about things about and fixing your data and looking for patterns and especially grouping in your data. So I'll probably mention it more than once, but if each of your rows is unique and has nothing to do with each other, that's a terrible database to work with to organize. Meaning there is no patterns, there's nothing to help organize it with. It's just a bunch of stuff that's all unique. So if we're in that situation, don't worry. You can also switch databases. You can go use a database within Airtable. That's always a fine choice. So if we have to pivot, this is a good week to do it. And I'll be looking forward to everyone's contribution. So good luck this week, and have a great one.